Welcome to Madness. So for people who are like, "Hey, Shannon's normally done more videos by now. What's going on?" This is what was going on. And yeah, this is one of those things where I go, "Hey, it would be fun," and it starts out as an idea where it might be done in a power ranking style, and then it turns into this. And at one point, I was like, "Well, I could take a picture of the board and then try to figure out a way to power rankings it," and then I kept adding to it, so here we are. Now, the reason I'm doing this is simple. 1981, I started really getting into hockey. Why? There was a Cinderella story in the game that was fantastic. The Minnesota North Stars. So, the Minnesota North Stars and their Cinderella run was great. And I thought, well, what about other Cinderella runs? 1982, you have the Vancouver Canucks. Right? Same thing. So, the 1981 North Stars, the 1982 Vancouver Canucks set me up as a hockey fan to root for the unlikely to get to a Stanley Cup final and for the unlikely to potentially win it. They usually don't. But let's go through it. And again, this took a while. This is one of those boards that I had to call the wife downstairs while she's doing masks and stuff and surgical caps and say, "Hey, I need you to at least look at this." And she just looked and said, "That's crazy." Yeah. So, 1981, the finalists, the Minnesota North Stars, they were 35, 28, and 17 that year. They had home ice advantage? None. Zero. Home ice to start a series, no times. And so they went through Boston, they went through Buffalo, they went through Calgary, and then they played the New York Islanders in the Stanley Cup Finals. And the reason that you see three Eastern teams is because that was when it was 1 versus 16 and not the standard divisional matchups. So they played Boston, Buffalo, Calgary, Islanders. Pretty brutal. Really, really brutal travel right there. So they do lose to the Islanders in the finals. Then 1982, the Vancouver Canucks, 33 and 17, so a below 500 record. Home ice advantage twice out of four. So they started at home twice, and that was against Calgary and against LA. They did not start at home against Chicago or against the Islanders. And of course, the Islanders ended that Cinderella run. I'm starting to see why I was not a big fan of the Islanders, because you want to see those runs just go, those under represented teams, those teams that you just think, going to the playoffs, so at least they tried, and then they do something like this. Now, for 1983, I had to kind of dig, and it's the round two. I chose the New York Rangers, and you guys can feel free to, in the comment section below, mention other teams that went on improbable runs. I just wanted to pick one per year. There were some years that there were multiples, and then there was 2015 and 2018 where I really couldn't find one that was really that unlikely. I know Vegas is going to bring up Vegas, but Vegas was a home ice advantage situation in every round. So I can't look at a situation where a team's got home ice advantage in every single round and say, but they were underdogs in every round, because they really weren't. So the New York Rangers, 35, 35, and 10 in 1983. They had home ice neither time against Philadelphia or the Islanders. The Islanders ended that one as well. 1984, the Montreal Canadiens, Steve Penney. They went to the conference finals. They were 35, 40, and 5, so again, a below 500 record. Home ice advantage, once. They played Boston, Quebec, and then the Islanders, and they lost to the Islanders. The Chicago Blackhawks, conference finalists, 38, 35, and 7 in 1985. They had home ice twice because the North Division wasn't very good. The North Division was pretty poor. So even though they were barely above 500, they played Detroit and then the Minnesota North Stars before they lost to the Edmonton Oilers in the next round. And there was a benefit for teams coming out of the Smythe Division, that the team that came out of the North was usually a bit of an easier opponent than whoever was coming out of the Patrick or the Adams in the East. 1986, Rangers again, conference finalists with a record of 36, 38, and 6. Home ice advantage, they didn't have it. They played Philadelphia, the Washington Capitals, and the Montreal Canadiens. The Montreal Canadiens ended that Cinderella run, but the Capitals do show up on the board a couple of times. Not likely as often as Washington fans might expect. 1987, it is the Detroit Red Wings, who were conference finalists with a record of 34, 36, and 10. They had home ice twice, again, in a division that was made up of some pretty poorly ranked teams. Chicago, Toronto, they went through before they lost to the Oilers as well. 1988, the New Jersey Devils went on that run to the conference finals, and everybody who remembers that one, that was a great run. That was Sean Burke, right? 38, 36, and 6 during the regular season, and they had home ice advantage near zero. No, zip. Didn't have it. They went through the Islanders first, so it's the first time we see a Cinderella team beat the Islanders, and then they went through the Capitals before they lost to the Boston Bruins in the conference finals. Conference finalists in 1989. Again, it's a Norris Division team. It's the Chicago Blackhawks, who were 27, 41, and 12. Miserable regular season record, and then in the postseason, they beat Detroit, they beat St. Louis, and then they lost to the Calgary Flames in the conference finals. They gave Calgary a good run, though. 1990, now it's the Capitals that are the Cinderella team. They went to the conference finals with a record of 36, 38, and 6. Home ice advantage. They didn't have it in any round. New Jersey, New York Rangers, and then Boston ended it. So Boston, both in 1988 and 1990, maybe a bit of an easier conference finals matchup. Didn't matter, they lost in the finals against the Oilers both times. 1991, the Minnesota North Stars are back on the board, and Dallas is not on the board as a team that wins as an underdog, but the North Stars are there twice. Finalists with a record of 27, 39, and 14, 10 years after I started watching hockey. I was very excited. It was my senior year in high school. I was very excited to see Minnesota win a Stanley Cup, and it didn't happen. 27, 39, and 14 record. Nobody expected them to get anywhere in the playoffs. They did not have home ice advantage at all. They beat Chicago, St. Louis, the Oilers. You want to see me do a dance? That series against the Oilers did it. And then the Penguins made sure that dancing crap stopped. The Oilers in 92 are the underdog team. And this is the first one that we see on the board where it's a relatively recent Stanley Cup champion. But the Oilers were gutted. And most of their top-notch talent was gone by 92. At least the guys you'd remember from the dynasty that went from 1984 through 1990. They were 36, 34, and 10. They did not have home ice advantage. Not a single home ice advantage to be found. They went through LA, they went through Vancouver, which was shocking and upsetting to me, and then they lost against Chicago. So that was one time where, yes, I was definitely cheering for Chicago. 1993, the LA Kings made the improbable run to the Stanley Cup Finals with a record of 39, 35, and 10 in the regular season. They didn't have home ice in the playoffs either. They went through Calgary, Vancouver, Toronto, and then Montreal stopped them in the Stanley Cup Finals. So we got a finalist here, finalist here, finalist here, and finalist here. 4 Cinderella teams that went to the Stanley Cup Finals in that top row. One thing that's interesting, 2015 and 2018, I have none that I could find that were real underdog stories. 2019 really isn't indicative of just how close things are. And it does make you wonder, if I couldn't pull a team from 2015, 2018 that was a real true Cinderella story, maybe we overrate just how much parity there is in the NHL now. Maybe it's been there all along, and maybe it was kind of better back then because you didn't have an ability to scout everybody. 1994, the Vancouver Canucks show on the board for the second time. 41, 40, and 3 was their record in the regular season. They were good in 93, they were good in 92. 94, they honestly were on their way down, but then they got hot in the playoffs. With a huge comeback victory, they had home ice advantage in none of these series, but there's an asterisk to this. They didn't have home ice against Calgary. They started on the road against against Dallas and Toronto, but they went 2 on the road and then 3 at home. This was the 2-3-2 setup, and they used it to their advantage against Dallas and Toronto. And then against the Rangers, there was no such setup, and the Rangers took care of business in Game 7 at home. New Jersey Devils in 1995, they win the Stanley Cup as the Cinderella story. So it's the first Cinderella story to me that's winning the Stanley Cup. Regular season record of 22, 18, and 8. So this is a lockout shortened season. Home ice advantage, they didn't have it. They were excellent on the road. They beat Boston, Pittsburgh, Philly, and Detroit. None of those teams were a poor team. This is why when I did my power rankings of Stanley Cup champions over the last 30 plus years and people lost their minds about how highly rated I had New Jersey's run, Boston, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Detroit, you look up the records of those teams, pretty good teams that they went through. There was not a gimme in those playoffs. 1996, the Florida Panthers kind of sort of did the same thing, just their finalist opponent was different. They went through 3 of the same teams in the East. They get to the finals with a record of 41, 31, and 10. It's their first time in the playoffs. Home ice advantage, they had it once. They beat Boston, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and then they went to the Stanley Cup Finals and lost to the Colorado Avalanche. So Boston, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, both of those years, they lose to a team that they probably on paper should have beaten and didn't. The New York Rangers, conference finalists in 1997, actually show up on this board a few times. 38, 34, and 10 in the regular season. They did not have home ice advantage in any series. They played Florida in round 1, New Jersey in round 2, and then it was Philadelphia that said, no, we've had enough of the Cinderella stories knocking us off. This is the third year in a row we're saying no. Not only that, but they got knocked off 1, 2, 3, 4 times on the board before they knocked a Cinderella team out in my calculations. 1998, and this is where Buffalo fans may very well disagree with me. I think both the 98 and 99 runs by Buffalo were extremely contingent on Hasek, and they were teams that were pedestrian during the regular season and then in the postseason got it together. 36, 29, and 17 in 1998. They had home ice once in those 3 rounds. They played Philadelphia and Montreal before they lost to the Capitals in the 98 conference final. In 1999, they get to the Stanley Cup Finals. Again, their regular season record, 37, 28, and 17. Not a great overall record, but they had home ice, none. Not a single series they had home ice advantage in. They beat the Ottawa Senators, Boston Bruins, Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Dallas Stars. That was a good run for Buffalo, and they really honestly played some pretty good competition in 99. 2000... this is where it's hard to find one. So I went with the San Jose Sharks in 2000, who knocked off the St. Louis Blues in round 1 before they lost to Dallas in round 2. So only second round. Record of 35, 30, 10, and 7. Home ice advantage. They didn't have it, but again, they just only made it to the second round. And there's a few other times where the second round shows up. And again, it's more towards the recent. It does get harder for those teams that finish further down in the standings, it would appear, to go on those nice long runs. Conference finals in 2001 for the Pittsburgh Penguins, 42, 28, 9, and 3. They did not have home ice advantage in any round. They beat the Capitals, they beat the Buffalo Sabres, and then they lost to the New Jersey Devils. 2002, it is Carolina's turn. Yes, Carolina, the first of 2 times they showed up on the board, and I almost had them for the 2019 pick, but I kind of sort of had to have somebody else for the 2019 pick, but we'll get there. 2002, they had a record of 35, 26, 16, and 5. They had home ice 3 times, but they had home ice because of the division they were in and being a division leader. They were not expected at the start of the playoffs to get very far. They went through New Jersey, who had won a Stanley Cup here and a Stanley Cup here, and would win a Stanley Cup again in 2003. They went through Montreal, a team that was a very difficult playoff opponent, and a Toronto Maple Leafs team that still was trying to build towards being a Stanley Cup champion. It was actually pretty close, and then they lost to the Detroit Red Wings in the final. 2003, I went with finalists again. I went with the Anaheim Ducks, who were 40, 27, 9, and 6 during the regular season. Home ice, they didn't have it. So Detroit, Dallas, Minnesota, and then the New Jersey Devils. The New Jersey Devils knocked them off in what was actually a really fun series, and I was really hoping Anaheim would win it, and they didn't quite get there. That's why I'm wearing my Ducks jersey. My Mighty Ducks jersey was for these guys. This was one of my favorites. 2004, the Calgary Flames, and that's despite the fact that this Minnesota-Anaheim series was a black hole in terms of entertainment. Might have been the most boring series I'd ever watched. 2004, the Calgary Flames, finalists, record of 42, 37, and 3 overall, home ice. They didn't have home ice advantage at all in these playoffs. They beat Vancouver, Detroit, San Jose, and then they lost to Tampa in the Stanley Cup Finals. So these underdog runs, when you see a team that's starting on the road every series, it can be fun to watch. Speaking of which, the Edmonton Oilers coming out of the lockout 2006, 41, 28, and 13. Nobody picking them to get anywhere in the playoffs. They had home ice, none, 0. They were an 8th seed. They beat Detroit in the first round, San Jose in the second round, Anaheim in the third round, and then they lost to the Carolina Hurricanes in the Stanley Cup Finals between 2 teams nobody expected to be there. 2007, hey, look, it's the Rangers. They were a round 2 team that year, record of 42, 30, and 10. They didn't have home ice. They did knock off Atlanta. There's an asterisk to that, right, that the Atlanta Thrashers, that's the only time they made the playoffs, and then they lost to Buffalo. But that was the best I could come up with for 2007 in terms of a Cinderella run. So it does get kind of sketchy at points on this board. 2008 conference finals, 42, 29, and 11 were the Philadelphia Flyers. Home ice, they never had it. They beat the Capitals, they beat the Canadiens, and then they lost to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh likes to end these runs after a couple of years there where they were the team that actually suffered against the Cinderella teams. 2009 conference finalists, the Carolina Hurricanes, would fall against Pittsburgh as well. They were 45-30-7 overall. Their home ice advantage, they didn't have it. They beat New Jersey, they beat Boston, and then they lost to Pittsburgh. Now, 2010, the Philadelphia Flyers would overcome an 0-3 deficit and end up going on kind of a big run out of that. They were finalists. They were 41-35-6. Home ice advantage, they had it once. And their overall run went as such. They went against the New Jersey Devils, then the Boston Bruins, followed by Montreal, and then the Chicago Blackhawks said, that's nice, and shunted them aside in the first Stanley Cup victory for Chicago in a while. 2011, Nashville. Nashville's kind of been able to come up, and this is why I think Nashville's better off as underdogs. If we have playoffs this summer and Nashville gets in as a wild card, I think I like their chances better than when they were favorites. So round 2 in 2011, 44-27-11 overall. They didn't have home ice in either series. They knocked off Anaheim in round 1 before Vancouver took them out in round 2. 2012, LA, Stanley Cup champion on the board for the second time. The New Jersey Devils first. LA Kings next. 40-27-15 was their overall record. Home ice, they didn't have it. They were number 8 seed. They knocked off Vancouver in the first round spectacularly. And then when everybody was laughing at Vancouver, they then took out St. Louis. They took out Arizona. And then New Jersey in the Stanley Cup Finals. 2013, I went with a round 2 team again. This is the Ottawa Senators. They were 25-17-6 during a lockout shortened season. Home ice, they didn't have it, but they knocked out Montreal in the first round before Pittsburgh said, that's great, you guys are a Cinderella team. We like knocking them off. The Minnesota Wild was the team I came up with for 2014. Yeah, Minnesota Wild. Round 2, 43-27-12. Honestly, in 2003, the Cinderella run they had was stronger and went further, but Anaheim usurps them by Anaheim making the Stanley Cup Finals. So round 2, 43-27-12. Home ice, they didn't have it. They beat Colorado and then celebrated by losing to Chicago. And, you know, honestly, a lot of teams lost to Chicago in the playoffs in the 2010s. So 2015, I couldn't find one. I was like, these are all kind of favorites and home ice teams, and not really a big surprise. So, for instance, if a team might have been a number 3 team in their division, but they still had 102 or 103 points, I'm not going to qualify that as a big Cinderella run. We knew they were good. So, 2016, the Nashville Predators get to round 2, and 41-27-14 was their record. They didn't have home ice. They beat Anaheim again. Then they lost to San Jose in round 2. San Jose went to the Stanley Cup Finals in 2016. Vancouver went to the Stanley Cup Finals in 2011. 2017, the Nashville Predators are up there again. 2 years in a row, they're the Cinderella team. 41-29-12. And this is when people around here start yelling at me that it's Nashville country. Home ice advantage, it doesn't exist. Chicago, St. Louis, Anaheim, and then Pittsburgh. There wasn't an easy team that they went through on the way to a Stanley Cup Finals where they lost to Pittsburgh, who like to take out teams that are Cinderella teams. So 2018, as I said, I didn't really find one that I thought was a Cinderella team. You look at the Final Four that year, you have Vegas, who had an amazing regular season and 109 points. You had Winnipeg, who had a ton of points that year as well. You had Tampa Bay, very, very solid team, top to bottom. And then you had Washington, who had been a top seed for years, had Ovechkin. There's not really a Cinderella. I mean, I guess you can kind of qualify the Caps as a surprise, but that's not the same thing. 2019, St. Louis counts. And Carolina gets the honorable mention from last year because Carolina did something we all should have expected, but we didn't. 2019 Stanley Cup for St. Louis. 45-28-9 overall. And I took a bath on the first round predictions video that we did before the playoffs started, but I did say I thought St. Louis would go to the Stanley Cup Finals. I didn't have them winning the Stanley Cup Finals, but I thought they'd make the Stanley Cup Finals. Home ice, they had home ice advantage once in the entire playoffs. They went through Winnipeg, they went through Dallas, they went through San Jose, and they went through Boston on their way to a Stanley Cup. There's not an easy team on that board. Dallas, has trouble scoring, but they pushed them pretty far. And so St. Louis, very, very impressive run to Cinderella them. So there you go. I thought this would be fun to do. Like I said, 2015 and 2018, I couldn't really find a team that I thought fit. I would be interested to know which Cinderella run that's not on the board that you guys think was really impressive, something that was really fun to watch at the time, and may have made you a bigger hockey fan. So there you go. Because to me, you know, Cinderella runs are really entertaining. I mean, they're given that term because they're the underdog, and so usually the underdog doesn't win. But in '95, pretty solid run from a New Jersey team that, yes, had been excellent in '94, and they would be excellent after that. But that '95 Cup was amazing considering they never had home ice once. Stanley Cup then for the 2012 LA Kings that were an 8th seed, and a Stanley Cup for the St. Louis Blues, who only had the home ice advantage once. So, pretty impressive runs. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. It means a lot during this time that we're in. And hey, I will talk to you guys again soon.